Well, good morning, everyone, and a huge welcome to the first in a series of National Sheep Association Breakfast Clubs. We're really privileged this morning to be able to launch this series of events in the presence of our Minister for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Prentis. Minister Prentis, a huge welcome to you, and thanks for joining us this morning. I am sorry that we can't offer you a real breakfast. This is a breakfast club meeting, but I am really sorry we can't offer you a real breakfast. But one day we will get back to our normal sheep events, and we'll invite you along, and we'll make sure we do things properly at that stage. But and I'll make sure it's worth the wait as well, really. So, Minister, we've got a huge range of subjects that we'd like to cover. We're at a really influential time in terms of change within agriculture and obviously within sheep farming as well. Could you just start by taking just a couple of minutes to outline your vision for agriculture and sheep farming in the UK?
Yes, thanks, Phil. It's good to see you again, and it's lovely to be here. I'm sorry that we're not eating bacon and eggs, whatever you normally eat that's a sheep product at breakfast time. I love talking sheep, so I'm particularly sorry that I can't be with you. I've got a few Zworbels at home, and my dad farms our family farm, and obviously I've always been involved 2 miles from where I live. He used to keep sheep in quite a big way when I was a child. And in fact, my mother was from Bilthwells. So you'll all appreciate that sheep are in my DNA. This is, I think, a happier meeting considerably than it would have been had we not got a deal just before Christmas. So I expect that after a very worrying, truthfully, few years for you all, you are feeling quite relieved at the moment. I know that sheep prices had remained remarkably high. I always wondered what you knew that the rest of us didn't, because I simply couldn't believe how they were maintained throughout November and December, when really I felt it wasn't clear that we would be getting a zero tariff deal. But I'm very glad that you kept the faith, and I'm very glad that we got a deal. I am, however, aware that what is perhaps sometimes dismissed as paperwork, by which I mean really stringent export requirements to the EU, is undoubtedly causing some of you who are exporting already quite a lot of difficulty. We've obviously seen this most acutely in the fish sector, but it does apply to lamb as well. The rules are difficult, the forms are hellish. We are working very hard in Defra and very closely with HMRC, because truthfully, we can talk about this in a minute, most of the problems build up at the customs end, but we can help you on a very one-to-one basis through those processes, and we will get there because our meat is great and we need to export it. Other things we need to talk about probably are the new ELM, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, so new forms of support for farmers. The national pilot is starting this spring. We welcome expressions of interest. The new transitional arrangements, as it were, will roll out during next year and will be available to all who receive BPS at the moment. So that's very much for everybody, is my message today. We'll be launching a red meat contract consultation later this year. There'll also be legislation this year on sheep carcass classification, which will come into force in the early part of next year. We will continue to work with you. You know, we're doing a consultation on live exports for slaughter and fattening at the moment. It closes on the 28th of January. Please do reply, or forever hold your peace, quite frankly, because if you don't join in with the consultation, your views will not be heard. But I hope that's just kicked us off, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Straight on.
We've already had some questions posted about some of the subjects that you raised already. We'll come back to them at the moment. But I guess it's worth just thinking about the role and the importance of British sheep farming. And You know, wherever you drive in the UK, maybe not at this time of the year because it's so wet that many sheep are indoors now, but wherever you drive in the UK, you see sheep and sheep farming. It's a method of farming that's spread right across from our lowlands to our uplands. Increasingly, we're starting to see a reintroduction of sheep into arable areas as well. We within the industry feel it's probably one of the most or it can contribute most to sustainable agriculture going forward in terms of the building of soils in the lowlands and the protection of some of our most iconic countryside. Could you just say in a few moments how you see the importance of sheep farming in the UK? I'll just go on to say as well that whilst it fits within the UK, you know, really well, it's really important in terms of our economic activity. We're the largest, by far the largest sheep producer in Europe. We're actually the third largest exporter of sheep meat globally as well. So we're really important globally in the world of sheep farming. So could you just again give your a few comments about how you see the future of sheep farming in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, you hit all the right notes, Phil. We absolutely, lamb is good to eat, sheep is good to eat. We enjoy it and we enjoy exporting it, and that's right. And I think with this audience, we can almost take that as read. What we can't take as read, perhaps, is the importance that those on this call will feel sheep farming has to our landscape and to our environment, which is where you started. And I personally feel very strongly about that. As I said, my mother was born in Bilf. I've been brought up all my life with a grazed environment, a close grazed environment. And my husband is from Wensleydale. So we holiday and weekend wherever we can, obviously not at the moment, in a beautiful farm there where sheep farming is so much part of the environment that it is impossible to separate the two. That's not to say that we can't do different forms of grazing, that we can't graze very hard and then move them. We can't go back to different field patterns. I think what we've got to do, though, as a sector, is be proud of what we do in environmental terms. I was really pleased to see that AHDB have launched a campaign recently promoting red meat eating. I think we have got to stick up for ourselves in the food marketplace, as it were, and stick up for the environmental benefits that our sector undoubtedly has.
And in that, I'll bring Bryan in just one second, but in that whole area, we'll go on to maybe ELMs at the moment and development of ELMs, but in that that whole area of sheep and against our upland areas and their role in the environment, we know that the government has got really significant tree planting targets. And in so many of the meetings that I take place in, whenever we talk about tree planting, the conversation goes straight to the uplands. And I would argue that some of those uplands are the most areas that already contribute brilliantly to the environment already, and actually to plant them with trees would really disrupt the local economic activity. It would undermine and affect the ecology and the aesthetics of the area as well. And actually, there's a lot of other places where we should be planting trees and not in the uplands that are just covered in permanent grass. This is a really stable, form of land management. And our view is that we should be integrating more trees within our farm landscape, not giving up our land to trees.
Yes, we are going to have to fight our corner, though, Phil. There are a lot of voices and a lot of areas. And where we go in Hawes, for example, there is a lot of forestry already with sheep in the field next door, as it were. And that is a perfectly acceptable, to my view, way of farming that type of very difficult landscape, very exposed and very beautiful landscape. I think you're right. I think we need to keep pushing the environmental benefits that sheep grazing can have for the environment. We are going to be under a lot of pressure as a nation to do a lot with our land. There's voices calling for more biomass to be produced, which is very land intensive. There's many tree voices, and rightly, I'm one of them, a lot of the time. But what we do need to make sure, as with the rewilding conversation that goes on, is that prime agricultural land is not taken out of production without a great deal of thought. We grow 60%-ish of the food we eat in this country. I certainly have an ambition for that to be higher. Some of that can be done through robotics and modern technology and efficiency, certainly in the horticultural space and the fruit growing space, for example, but not all of it. We will need land to produce food, and I don't think we should be shy of saying so.
Thank you. Brian, can I bring you in?
Yeah,
I know you've got a question you'd like to ask.
Well, much of what I wanted to discuss you've already answered, really, but I live in the world of the sort of commercial sheep farmer, and I listen to the mutterings in the markets and so on. And many of the actions that we're seeing at the moment, for example, the proposed transport regulations, certain aspects of ELM, the actions of Natural England, and this sort of desire to plant more trees, farmers often interpret that as almost disincentives to production, and some kind of they question if there is a grand plan to reduce the national flock. And so I just wonder, at the higher level, is there a real understanding of food security and an understanding that we can produce something that is needed and exportable and so on?
Yes, I think there is. I feel very fortunate in Defra at the moment in that we have 4 ministerial offices full of 4 farmers, essentially, or people who were very close to farmers. So we certainly talk as a group of ministers a great deal about the importance of maintaining the national herd. I wouldn't say we were unusual voices in Defra, but we are certainly quite loud voices in Defra on that space. Not everybody agrees with us. I do think it is important that organisations like the NSA keep making that case, because others are keen to make the alternative case and are loudly doing that. On food security, Henry Dimbleby, you may know, is doing a big review into our food and food security. It's the National Food Strategy. He published part 1 last summer, which was partly to do with the pandemic and how we responded to that. But he's publishing the much greater document in a couple of months, part 2, which will, I hope, and I talk to him often about it, go in some detail into the plan that we ought to have if we're going to have a proper source of food in the next 10, 20 years. It will be the first proper review we've had for a very long time into our food security. And I think the general public has woken up in the course of the last year to a sense of where their food comes from in a way that they hadn't awfully before. We saw panic buying, which I never mentioned, in last March in a big way, and supplies went down to sort of 52% on the shelves, which really frightened people. And I think since then, those with enough cash to spend have been making a point of buying local in a way that perhaps they hadn't before. So, and have been slightly more aware of where their food comes from, whether it's because people are spending that precious hour there or however long they're allowed outside in the countryside a bit more. I think our plans for access to the countryside could be used by farmers very creatively. I saw one farm where the farmer had put up signage, basically, explaining what he was growing, what was grazing in the field, and what it was going to become. And I think we can genuinely use what we've learned in the last year to educate the public and to encourage them to want to eat British food.
Minister, if I think back to the Oxford Farming Conference just a couple of weeks ago and the presentation that was made by our Secretary of State, George Eustice, alongside Fergus Ewan and Leslie Griffiths and Edwin Poots, I'd have to say that the English view, George Eustice's view, was probably still alone in terms of not wanting to speak out to recognise the value of the importance of food production. And I know that's not the case because I work in so many forums with Defra and Minister. I know it's not the case, but the devolved nations seem to be in a position where they're able and willing to speak up about the importance of farming and the importance of keeping people productive on the land. Again, is there a twist of language even that could be made to shift that position in England?
Well, possibly. I think about food a lot. I talk about food a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's integral to everything I do as farming and fisheries minister. I mean, of course, we're producing food. We changed the Ag Act so that food was specifically right at the beginning, front and centre of what we were doing. I wonder if our Secretary of State, who after all was a farmer, was perhaps concentrating on the practicality of producing food at the Oxford Farming Conference, as is his way. He was making really quite an exciting speech for farmers, I think, on gene editing, which after all, you know, words are cheap. It's easy to talk about food production. What we need to do is put in place the right policies, which might not always be easy, and might come up against criticism from environmental groups or others, for example. And he was trying to set out his stall for moving British farming forward into a world where gene editing is something we can harness to encourage our food production.
Just extending that conversation, because it's felt to me over the last week or so that there's been two slightly different directions coming out of the consultations from Defra. You know, one on gene editing, which the government clearly wants to get behind. It wants to change the conversation amongst the public and move away from that Frankenstein foods and GMO, and we're using a new terminology now of gene editing. And I would agree that there's got to be a lot of potential for
after all, selective breeding is hardly something that's alien to your members, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And gene editing has got the ability to improve our productivity, to improve our health and welfare. I would also argue that the consultation that is going on at the moment on live transport and journey times, again, that has got a huge impact on productivity. And profitability and the ability for the industry to operate. And yet it seemed when that consultation came out, that it was a done deal in terms of banning live exports. There was not to be a discussion. There was no suggestion that the government would help a conversation with the public about why this might take place, why journey times might take place, why animals might need to move in cold weather. There was no attempt to say, let's talk this through with the public, with industry. It was almost the industry, government had made a decision to stop this, and yet on the gene editing side, it was prepared to have a debate with society to change views. Why the difference?
No, I don't think that's right. It is a consultation. There is still time to put responses in, and I would very much encourage your members to do so, particularly, if you don't mind me saying so, on the minimum temperature point. There is clearly, well, we'll come on to leaving the EU and new customs regulations in a minute, I suspect. I think that there is a desire to at least look very carefully about whether we stop live exports. At the moment, as you know, they're very difficult to do because there aren't border control posts to receive animals. Genuinely, at the moment, this is not something that's easy. But it is a genuine consultation, and I think it's right that people put their views very clearly, and we will look at them. And I'm a proud meat eater. I am very happy to make the case on behalf of your members and other parts of the meat sector and the public who enjoy our products, after all, that we have to rear animals and transport animals in a way that they might not be aware of. I think it's right that we do have quite practical conversations, and I think the public can broadly cope with that.
Great, thank you. On a similar subject, related subject, I guess, let's just turn for a moment to Northern Ireland, because I think the Northern Ireland Protocol, and Northern Ireland was right at the outset of the whole departure from the EU, identified as something that was going to be a real challenge, and you know, it is proven to be that way, certainly for Northern Ireland's farmers. And I think the final details of the Northern Ireland protocols came as a little bit of a surprise to some farmers in terms of that recognition that Northern Ireland is now within the UK's trading area, but is within the EU's regulatory zone. And in terms of the health and phytosanitary controls, that does mean that anyone moving live sheep from GB to Northern Ireland has to undergo the same controls as if they were moving to mainland Europe now. And it's really hit people with this with the scrapie controls and some of the iceberg diseases as well. And in terms of the sheep industry within Northern Ireland, there's a lot of sheep, pedigree sheep, high value sheep, that would come back to the GB for shows, breed society shows and sales, that if they do that in the future, won't be able to return for 7 months. You know, effectively, they won't be able to return. So again, is there anything that can be done? Is there any discussion that can be had with the EU Commission, or anything we can do internally to change that, to allow a level of movements to continue to take place?
It is really complicated, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I think it is a fair challenge to say. I was a government lawyer for before I was elected to Parliament for a long time, for my whole career, and I read it at the time that it was created, but I think I'm in a very small minority, and I wouldn't in any way pretend that I have thought through all the ramifications even now. I have literally a list on my desk of issues as we find them that we are going to have to work through with the Commission. And I imagine they have a very similar list of items that where assumptions might have been made that in fact are not proving to be quite the case. We're going to be working on this for some time. So the current situation is that pedigree rams can travel from NI to GB without any fetters at the moment, but they must meet the same certification requirements as animals of GB origin if they're going back to NI. So we will re-engage with the Commission to try and solve this problem. Yes, any evidence you give us would be helpful. I think we understand the issue completely, but we will, it's on the list of issues we have to resolve. There are issues in all sectors. Obviously, the priority has been, particularly during the pandemic, has been keeping food supply very stable, making sure that there aren't any spaces on the shelves. That's been the real focus of this first period after the end of the transition period. So we've been concentrating on that. We are, however, in very daily contact with the Commission on a large number of issues. Animal transport is one that people feel very strongly about, not least pet transport as well, which has its problems between Northern Ireland and the Republic. So, I mean, you can imagine people who farm on that border moving very freely in the past with sheepdogs, for example. So we need to continue to engage with the Commission on this. I can't, we're going to get everything we want to. The EU is taking an SPS view, which it is entitled to take legally. But I think in the end, as we move away from a negotiation which has been very, very difficult and painful for both sides, and we move more towards a sort of friendly and neighbourly relationship, which you would expect us to have in the future with our friends and neighbours who are our great trading partners, hope that some of these issues can be smoothed out, but that they are legal issues. They're not easy to resolve.
We're
anybody
aware of
to
that.
be under any illusion that
We're aware of that.
That can be agreed.
Okay, good. Let's move on. And I apologise if we're dodging around a little bit. I'm also watching some questions coming in again. I'd like to just go back to the whole subject of environment and environmental payments and ELMs. And there's one question that's come in asking when we can expect to see the proposed payment rates for ELMs actions. There's been a lot of discussion. Yeah, okay, shortly. That's a great answer.
I mean, not tomorrow, but certainly we are aware. I said right from the beginning when I got involved in this new project that farmers do care about the bottom line. We are in this profitable businesses, what we're trying to be, and we do need to know. And I've been very, very keen that farmers will receive individual accounts, if you like, in the end, which says you will not be receiving this in BPS you know, with individual numbers worked out. There's no point in talking big, high level about this. People actually need to know what it means for them and their business. So there will be numbers coming out for ELMs in the next few months, definitely. And then I'm hoping that people will receive their own accounts, if you like, targeted to their farm, as you normally do from the RPA.
I'd also,
go on, Bryan. Yeah.
Well, we've been involved to some extent in the trial testing and trials and so on, and have heard some figures. And I would, you know, congratulate Defra on their efforts. They've been very thorough and in the process. But at the same time, it is very time consuming. And the only certainty we have at the moment is that the basic payment is fizzling out. So keep things moving along.
The other certainty we've got, Bryan, is that we're getting the same amount of money for every year of this Parliament. Yeah.
That brings me on to it. I'm sorry. Wearing my sheep farmer's hat. One comment that I pick up regularly is that as sheep farmers, we are generally extensive. We have very little infrastructure and so on. And people have this perception that they can see money being shifted in large sums, for example, into slurry stores on dairy farms and so on. And we feel perhaps that our industry might just fall short there. And on the same point, we see land, how can I put it? A lot of ELM may be being directed into regenerating, let's say, overused, exhausted arable land, in essence, to transform it into that which we've got already. And so I'm constantly hearing farmers, for goodness sake, please recognize what we've got already.
Yeah, no, we've been very, very clear that early adopters, or indeed people who've never not adopted, because sheep farming is intrinsically not highly intensive in its nature normally, will not be penalised by the new policies. We've always been really, really clear that we have to develop policies which work for the uplands, but for other sorts of sheep farming as well. You'll know, because you're probably involved, that we are trying to pilot all of our new schemes. So we've got, well, later this year, we'll have 5,500 farmers actually involved in piloting. So we are genuinely trying to do this with those of us in the industry. The downside to that is that I can't just read from a bit of paper what our new policies are going to be at this precise moment with a figure attached to them. The good side is, of course, it will make for much, much better and more secure policy in the end. But I would encourage people to get involved in the national. Sheep farming has a very special place in our nation's farming, and we need to make sure that we're very fully represented.
That's great. Thank you, Minister. And again, you know, just to follow on from Bryan's comments, I too appreciate all the effort. There's a huge amount of work going in by your teams into the test and trial projects and the engagement with the industry on ELMs and Pathway as well. So that is very much appreciated.
This is a huge change. This is a change away from acre-based money.
Absolutely.
It is. What I want in the end, in 5 years' time, 4 or 5 years' time, whatever we've got left in this Parliament that I can feel secure about, I really want farming to be able to make its own case for the next lot of, I won't say subsidy, I'll say public money for public goods that we need to protect the environment and produce public goods such as public access and food, truthfully.
Absolutely.
So, but we need to think in a different way. We have been, well, all my lifetime that I can remember, we have just received Common Agricultural Policy payments. We have just had money for having land, regardless of what we were doing with it. We have got to move on from that and start loudly and clearly explaining what we do and why we do it and why it's worth it.
Good. Let's move into. Go on, Bryan.
Sorry, just briefly, a guy sent in a specific question earlier about the importance of keeping small farms viable, and I just think that's worth mentioning. In the west of the UK and the north, in these sort of livestock areas, farms tend to be quite small, and it can be argued that they are maybe old-fashioned, inefficient. At a recent meeting last week, actually, it was a Defra officer used the term unprofessional, which stung. But in truth, if you want to go and find a barn owl or bird's foot trefoil or a skylark or some ancient diverse hedgerow, actually that's the place to go, to those small family farms, really.
Well, often and sometimes not. I mean, what I think people who have not got a background in farming often miss is that many of us are both landlords and tenants at the same time. Many of us are commercial farmers and smallholders at the same time. I mean, I muck around with my small bulls and a couple of pigs. My father thinks I'm ridiculous, but he's an arable farmer really at heart. But he, you know, most of us probably on this call are a bit like that. And I think all of us probably appreciate an owl when we see one and are probably very aware of what is nesting in our fields and whether that's up on last year or down on last year. What we haven't done, if I'm honest, is talk about it.
Mm. I agree with that. We've never really taken ownership of it, and we need to. It's going to be an important part of the future, I think, for us to be that new breed of environmentalists, if you like, although we wouldn't necessarily reckon ourselves as being such. But.
Well, the first thing I did do when I came to the department last year is stop people talking about environmentalists and farmers as if they were different beings, because in my view, they're exactly the same. And Rebecca Powell, who is the Environment Junior Minister, who again comes from a dairy farming background and used to work on Farming Today and really, really knows her stuff. She did a degree in soil management. She and I are doing all the planning meetings for the future farming policies together, so that there is never any wedge between the industry and what people used to refer to as the environmental groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are one and the same, and we have got to get that message across.
Right. Let's stay in.
I refuse to believe anybody on this call doesn't know what wildlife is on their fields and want to increase it. I really,
Absolutely.
All your members will care passionately about what they've got at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to some other themes, I'd just like to move that environmental discussion on into the uplands. And I've got another question here. We're unlikely to see elms in upland and common land areas until 2024 at the earliest. And until then, farmers are being encouraged to renew countryside stewardship schemes. But we're hearing case after case where that renewal of the countryside stewardship scheme is resulting in the driving down of grazing numbers, and in many areas to a level where a really long-standing traditional system that creates I'd say that it creates a countryside that the public flock to anyway. That traditional system is being broken down and grassland habitats are being damaged. Is there any chance, I've talked about this before, but is there any chance on having a moratorium on further grazing reductions in CSS renewals until we've gone a bit further with the ELMs proposals? All of the renewals seem to be based on reducing further stocking levels.
Yeah, as somebody who supplementally feeds sheep regularly at this time of year, I know where you're coming from and where your members are coming from. I'm afraid I can't give you an immediate answer on that. We have not yet worked through completely how CS is going to morph into ELM. We are determined that it should, because we want people to get more and more involved in countryside stewardship until ELM is available, as you said. So it is really important that people do where they can. But I know that this is an issue, but we haven't yet I can't see the answer immediately, I'm afraid, Phil.
Okay, let's move on to another subject and talk a little bit about another topic that I know you're really keen on, which is abattoirs and small abattoirs and the meat supply chain. And I've got a question here from Anthony Goodyear from AIMS, who we work very closely with. Good morning, Minister. You are on record as saying that there could be a possible funding source through the Agriculture Act for small abattoirs. We are interested to know more about your support for small abattoirs. In addition, the restrictions caused by the pandemic has meant that audit and inspection was largely carried out remotely last year. This course of action was proved to be successful. And I think, the question there is, can we continue to use this sort of option going forward? And can that small abattoirs who provide a vital role within a livestock sector now be permitted to always have remote inspection rather than the current regime?
I'll feed that in. I think that's a very interesting idea. I think we've all learned a lot during the pandemic about what we can and can't do remotely. I've as the part of me that's a smallholder has always felt very passionately about small and mobile, indeed, abattoirs with proper safeguards, of course, because even commercial farmers like my dad would only slaughter 2 cattle at once at any one time. We had South Devons as I was growing up, and I don't want to prejudge a consultation on transport, but no animal and no farmer, in fact, enjoys transporting animals at all. The more we can do to bring slaughtering close to home has got to be the better. I would encourage small abattoirs they do make their case very effectively, and we have many MP champions who are prepared to talk about slaughtering, which is not a subject the general public are nor willing to discuss, and I think there is a strong and powerful movement now that small isn't necessarily a bad thing at all in the abattoir world. So I think that case is being made. I really do. And I think it's important that people are aware of the slaughter method and the slaughter place and the transport system that has been used in food aid.
At the start, Minister, as well, you mentioned you were surprised really at the fact that we managed to hold sheep prices up during the autumn. And although we're subject to fluctuating prices in the same as everyone else is really, but we are in a relatively good position in the sheep industry, and the fact that we've got a very wide range of markets.
Position at the moment.
But generally speaking, we're in a good position in that we've got a wide range of markets available to us. Those local markets, our big export markets, that market into the European Union, our supermarkets, and our halal sector as well. And it is one way that it just allows different markets to play off against each other, I guess. All of those markets are really, really important. On the subject of halal, you'll know that we've been talking for some time about trying to reconcile the importance of that market with a good public image and good animal welfare. And there is concern within our industry and within the public about non-stun slaughter as well. We've always felt that one of the solutions there would be to be able to demonstrate recoverable stun. They've done it in New Zealand, and it would be a way of hopefully persuading some of the Islamic scholars to accept that stunned animals are acceptable to go into the halal chain. At the moment, somewhere in a region of 65 to 80% maybe of halal lambs would be pre-slaughter stunned already. And if we could edge that up a little bit more, I think it would be in everyone's interest. So again,
definitely where the government is coming from. We respect religious slaughter, but we would rather that animals were stunned. I think the halal market is now so important that it is critical that we take this argument forward and make it wherever we can. And I'm sure that Defra, I know that Defra will be willing to help you make that case if we are of assistance. In terms of our export markets, I think clearly the EU has been our biggest trading partner in this sector for lamb in particular, but I think there are real opportunities. So we signed the trade deal with Japan just before Christmas, and we think probably that'll be worth about 127 million for lamb in the next few years. We're also quite excited by new opportunities in China, in Vietnam, and possibly in America over the next few years as well. So we're definitely ramping up our ability, I think, to sell our high quality meat abroad.
Again, on that subject, I've got a question that's coming from Mike Gooding. Minister, the new, we've covered this somewhat anyway, but it'd be good just to touch on the subject again. Minister, the new export paperwork is indeed hellish. We are back to using hard copy paperwork. In the 21st century, this is not fit for purpose, nor the actions of an ambitious trading nation. When will systems be properly implemented, and can we set a specific date? That might be asking a bit much.
Just back up that one, Phil. There are other questions the same. Another one says that we've got a free trade deal, but it's not quite as free as we'd hoped. This is obviously quite a big one, and it affects all of us, really. The sort of obstacles, if you like, to that great market in Europe.
Okay, yeah, no, fair. I was a passionate Remainer, but not for great reasons of sovereignty. I remember doing a speech about what I called the faff factor. And it is the faff factor that is hitting us and your industry, and anybody, in fact, who's in trying to export a product that goes off quickly. It's very difficult at the moment. So yes, we've known this was coming. Yes, we've trained and prepared for it. But as George Eustace says, everybody's trained, but nobody's experienced. So we have a difficult time of trying to fill in the forms, which are, well, the ones for which we have control. We have tried to simplify as much as we can. And we have tried to make the system as digitized as possible. And we have succeeded, in fact, in providing, touch wood, enough vets and enough local authority compliance officers to sign those EHCs, and that is going all right, despite a few difficulties right at the beginning. The difficulty we are finding is with the customs procedures, over which, truthfully, we don't have control. There, other nations are responsible for them. And those forms can be really, really difficult. 17 pages of Spanish and having to tick every box, whether it's nothing to do with your product or not. And we have had very granular discussions with the French and the Irish and the Dutch in particular over the last couple of weeks about whether they require blue ink or red ink, and whether they need every page to be stamped, and this level that we're getting into, as well as those other bigger discussions with the Commission about Scrapie, for example, which we were talking about earlier. So we're having two parallel levels of discussions with the EU at the moment. One is, where do we put the stamp on the form, and the other is, can we get over this legal problem with Scrapie, for example. Completely separate, and all of this is being done in the context of the worst pandemic any of us, I hope, will ever have to live through, with extra requirements which nobody could have foreseen about lorry drivers taking tests before they go anywhere. So I think, given the circumstances, we are doing okay. It's not easy. We are doing everything we can within Defra and HMRC to help exporters. I'm having almost minute by minute contact with the fish industry, for example, and some lamb. I talked to one lamb exporter directly over the weekend. He's a senior fellow in his export industry, and I rang him quite late on Saturday night, and he was filling in customs codes. I did not realise how difficult. All I can say is that we can't get rid of them. I mean, they're not our requirements; they're EU requirements. If we want to trade with this market, we're going to have to do them. All I can do, and all Defra can do, is help you to manage that process. We have got lots and lots of materials in the training space, but I'm also very happy to offer one-to-one support if that is helpful to your members. We're getting quite good at the customs forms now, so but there is more we can do. I mean, or you could organise and we could come and present, or we're in your hands.
And you touched on this earlier when you mentioned the fact that whole negotiation had been a fairly fractious process, and we need to get through that to a point where we can start to have constructive discussions with the EU again as well. So I guess that just another comment here from JP Garnier.
I mean, actually, sorry, go on. I mean, that is, of course, your customers can help us with that. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to a world where I can ring up the French agriculture minister and just have a chat about worries or you know, our view of the lamb sector or whatever it is. It's been very peculiar over the last 3 years because the negotiation team has been kept so tight and so far away from the normal relationships which Defra would have with the friendly country next door.
Yeah.
So we do need to rebuild our soft power, and your customers who really value our lamb, after all, are very much part, I think, of that discussion.
And could you just comment on how that's going to work in terms of rebuilding or re-establishing those relationships with the EU? Because you can imagine after the 24th of December, the two parties walking apart and thinking, I don't actually want to talk to each other for the next 6 months or so. But that can't be the case, you know, and presumably
No,
these
but
discussions
imagine if we hadn't got a deal. Imagine
oh, absolutely.
You and
Absolutely.
I would be having right now if we crashed out without.
Oh, absolutely. That brought a huge sense of relief to all of us. So there's no criticism there whatsoever, really. None whatsoever.
So I think, well, it also, I mean, it's not just the deal, though I accept that there are difficulties with exporting. I'd be dotty if I didn't. But thank goodness we haven't got the tax that was threatened on the bond.
Absolutely.
But it also is very important in relationship terms, because if we had left in a slamming the door sort of way, rebuilding those relationships would be much harder than
absolutely.
I mean, it's not easy at the moment. Every country is nervous. We have got a particularly virulent strain of the coronavirus in the UK, obviously, and I can understand and sympathise with other countries being a bit wary about that. And requiring extra tests from lorry drivers and things. I completely sympathise with where they're coming from on that. So these aren't great times to be rebuilding relationships, but I think we are. Yeah. And I know that at official level, we are working very, very hard on that. George is also talking to the French ministers directly this week, which hasn't happened for a very long time. So
great.
I'm a French speaker and a German speaker. I think this is important, and I'm really keen to get involved in that. But your customers and the relationships that your members will have directly are all useful too.
Great. Okay. Let's just have a quick mention of markets outside of the EU. And I've got a question here from JP Garnier about developing Far Eastern markets, now essential for our future. However, it's a difficult and slow undertaking, and most exporters do not have the financial resources to make this costly investment. There's definitely plans outside of AHDB to support exporters to exploit these opportunities. Brian and I and one or two others also had a discussion with a few people within AHDB just a couple of days ago about this. And again, it is felt that the UK, in comparison with many other countries around the world, is possibly underinvesting in terms of ambassadorial presence in a lot of these countries to develop the relationships that we need to secure future trade deals. We ourselves have had some painful experiences in terms of getting grant aid to support trade missions out to China and other places as well. It always costs us money, you know. We never get enough to cover our costs, really. But again, are there any plans for increased investment in that area and the support of the processors, exporters, and organisations like ourselves, maybe, to support these missions?
Yes, I really think there are. So the Department for International Trade is headed by a former Secretary of State for this department, Liz Truss, who feels very strongly that the food is great slogan and mission behind it is something that we really need to promote. What has worked really well is when we have a special person. We've got one in China and we've got one in Dubai, who are, their entire role is to help promote our exports in a way that is, you know, at the promotion level and also at the helping people fill in form level, which, as we all know, is a big barrier to exporting. I think these special officials, which are placed just to do our job, is probably the way to go in the future. But we're really, really happy to engage with you on that, and I know the Department for International Trade will be thrilled to. We mean it about international markets. It wasn't, while we were in the EU, it wasn't that there was there were necessarily legal barriers to trading with the rest of the world. I just think our ambition was different. And I genuinely think, and this is coming from somebody who wasn't a Brexiteer, I genuinely think that has changed. And we're all a bit exhausted. We're coping with the pandemic. Everybody's miserable because of that. We're also coping with a big change in how we export to the EU and all that paperwork. But I do think that when we've had a chance to recover ourselves a bit in the next few months, then this global ambition will show more and more. And I think that in a nation that is going to reform the way we reward farmers, we will be able to be really proud of what we produce on the world stage. And I mean, obviously, I want people to eat our lovely lamb here, but we want it eaten around the world as well.
Absolutely. And that domestic, just to remind everyone that, we still sell 60 or 65% of our production into our domestic market. And that is probably the most stable, not always the most lucrative, but it's a very stable market for us. So that investment into our domestic market is important. I'm keeping an idea on a watch on the clock, on the time. And I know you've asked to be able to get away really, really promptly as well. So I just want to...
I'm very sorry, everybody. I've got to go and talk to Fish next. Nobody thought that these first few months after the end of the transition period were going to be, well, we've always said they were going to be bumpy, was the word I used to use. And I think they are bumpy, but I think everybody is so relieved to have a deal that
absolutely
we will get through them.
Yeah. So before we finish, and hopefully we might even squeeze another question or two in, and this will give you the opportunity to be a little bit woolly, because you probably won't get that opportunity with the fish guys, I'm sure, when you speak to them. But just to move on to the subject of wool, I've got a couple of questions that have come in on wool. One from Andrew Hogley, who is the chief exec of the Wool Board. As you will be aware, COVID has had a devastating impact on the UK wool industry, mainly as a result of the closure of the hospitality sector, which is the biggest end market for wool carpets. British wool was excluded from support schemes such as Sybil's on the basis of being a public sector body, but received no alternative support, and has recently announced significant job losses, along with the permanent closure of 1/3 of its depots. Given that many farmers are likely to receive minimal value for their wool from last year, what tangible support can you offer the wool industry?
Yes, so obviously farmers can apply directly for the government support packages, and many have. Many farmers have applied for loans in particular. I think Andrew's written to me about this point quite recently, and we will be replying to him. I've literally got a pile of wool in the yard at the moment. I know what has happened to wool prices only too well, and I understand that this is a difficult time. We've also got a new problem with exports to China on wool, which I became aware of in the last few days. So there are definitely, I accept that these are difficult times for wool. I think we need to work together to look at new opportunities for the wool industry. Yes, that's part of our trade negotiations, but also internally. I also am very aware, well, many people who farm are also providers of hospitality with rural lets and rural B&Bs. It's clear to all of us that the hospitality sector has been very badly hit by this pandemic, and it is going to take them a few years before they recover and are wanting to replace the carpet, as it were. So I can see that there are difficult times ahead in that sector as well.
I mean, in this world of environmental concerns and
Phil, yeah, we were doing quite well.
We're doing very well. Just while we're waiting,
be a more sustainable farm.
Oh, he's back. Phil, we keep losing you, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am sorry. It's quite unusual, that really. But I was just saying.
Rural broadband.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I was just talking really about the sustainable qualities of wool, and the fact that,
oh yeah,
you know, with all
I mean,
the concerns.
Wool is something that really ought to have a bright future. It's just I accept that there are significant difficulties at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Bryan, is there anything that we've missed that you think needs to come up before we say thank you?
No, I think we've covered all the subjects. The one thing that has cropped up several times, and it's something that I pick up on, is, for goodness sake, do what you can to make these schemes and regulations appealing to all. It's slightly ironic that the fact that we have a good trade at the moment, if schemes aren't appealing enough, I think some farmers will just say, to hell with this, I'll produce for all I'm worth.
Yeah, no, I accept that. But I think, certainly not from your sector, I think people will be wanting to engage with our schemes. We will try and make them user friendly. We are acutely, well, in fact, we're testing the application form on 3 generations of my family. So if dad can do it, I can do it, and the daughter is thinking of applying to Cirencester can do it, then we reckon the rest of you can do it, quite frankly. And we will try and make, we've got to completely get our head around change. It is not going to be measured quite as much. It is going to be a much more holistic approach to whole farm management. We are not going to have the stringent penalties we've seen if we've put our bit of set aside in the wrong place. This is really new stuff. We need to work with the industry to get it right and to make it genuinely transformational. But I would encourage people not to cart from the sidelines, but to get involved. I really would, because only then will it become properly farmer friendly.
Well, it's 9:28, and I think we need to give you a couple of minutes to get to your
pre-fish. Yeah, lovely to
friends.
see you, and I'm very much looking forward to a proper breakfast.
Well, thank you very, very much for joining us, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are we still on? Have we still got people with us?
Yeah, there's still 93 people on the call.
Great. Okay. Well, it was just a comment to everyone that you know, I hope you found that useful. I know some of the responses.
Now start that again. You broke up, Phil. Can you start that again?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just saying the minister has obviously left us now, but I just wanted to say to everyone that you know, thank you very much. I hope you found that useful and interesting. I know some of the responses weren't necessarily as specific or as detailed as we would have liked, but that level of engagement I think is really quite helpful and useful. I really apologize for not being able to get through a lot of the questions that have come in. We've had a lot of questions and comments that have come in. I think we've probably covered most of the topics, at least, that have been raised by attendees. So I hope you've enjoyed it. And just finally, I wanted to say that our next session, we're going to do a series of these Breakfast Club get-togethers. Our next session is next Wednesday, the 27th of January, and that's going to be on the subject of trade. And our speakers there are Phil Hadley, who many of you will know, who's Director of Market Development. I won't get the job title right, but he's right at the top of that whole work within AHDB around market development and export development. Mike Gooding of Farmers First, and interestingly, Ben O'Brien from New Zealand Beef and Lamb, and obviously that will bring a little bit of interest as well. So I hope you know, and spread the message. You know, as many people who are interested and can join us, please do. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this hour, and it leaves us with the rest of the day to get on with some work. So thank you very much. And Bryan, have you got any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, just thanks to everybody who's listening. We've had over 100 people. That's really good. I must say, I was quite impressed. She seemed to have a real understanding of farming at a practical level. She comes from a farming family, so you know, there's some real positivity there. And again, our point as NSA, as an organisation, is to garner the views of the members and put them to the likes of Victoria, and I think we've done that. So it's good.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks very much, everyone, and we'll speak soon. Goodbye.
Cheers.